Story 1. The teachers at my elementary school would always tear the room apart for St. Patrick's Day and say, "The mischievous leprechauns did it." Even though I believed in leprechauns, my teachers were horrible actors, so I never believed it was the leprechauns who actually tore the room apart. One day, I got into a heated argument with my younger sister, trying to tell her that it was the teachers who did it, not the leprechauns. My dad interpreted this as me not believing in anything anymore. Later, he came into my room and said, "Listen, just like how we know Santa and the Easter Bunny are not real, there is no reason to spoil your sister's fun with leprechauns." I remember looking down at my toys on the floor for an hour trying to process that. Story 2. In Sweden, someone dressed as Santa actually visits your house. One year, my grandmother's German Shepherd jumped up, ripped the Santa mask from her neighbor's face, and ran out into the yard with it. Story 3. One year, my father lost his job, and we did not receive presents, but our cousins and other relatives still did. For a brief period, I thought Santa punished people who had been fired. Story 4. I was a surprise baby and my dad was older, so I have a half-niece who is 2 years older than I am. My own niece told me Santa did not exist, laughing out loud. I still played it off for another year to get extra presents. Story 5. The what? Fuck off. I am 41, and Santa is bringing me a present in 15 days. Story 6. I found out Santa didn't exist when I caught my dad eating the cookies and wearing the boots he claimed Santa left behind. I guess he really got into character. Story 7. I always knew it was a myth. Like Humpty Dumpty and Winnie the Pooh, they were just stories, so I never really believed them. I was never the kid who spoiled it for others. I assumed everyone was playing along. Story 8. We were extremely poor growing up, but always had an extravagant Christmas. It made sense that Santa was real. It was the only way. When I was 13, other kids at my school kept saying Santa was not real, so the seed of doubt was planted. I had made my mother a list of gifts earlier that month, as she had asked. One evening, when I was home alone, I looked for the presents. I was sure I would not find anything, but I did. I found the 3 things I had asked for. I cried. I do not really know why. I think it was confusion. When Christmas came, I pretended to be surprised by the gifts, but a big piece of the magic was gone. I had been a true believer and I felt crushed. I had an unusually rough childhood, which was likely a major factor. Story 9. My parents made me stay up late on Christmas Eve to help them assemble toys for my younger brother. Story 10. When I was 5, I lost a tooth. The tooth fairy left 50 pence under my pillow. The next morning, I asked my mom if the tooth fairy was real. She asked if I wanted the truth. I said yes. She told me the tooth fairy was not real. When my mom told my nan called me into the kitchen and angrily told me Father Christmas was not real either. I genuinely did not care, which upset her even more. Story 11. My mom never played the Santa game with us. We were told from the start where the gifts came from. The naughty list was real, but it was hers, and she certainly enforced it. She would say that she worked too hard to provide for us to let some fictional old man take the credit. Story 12. My brother and I found the gifts hidden in the closets and the basement. The next year, we showed our little sister and ruined Santa for her. Story 13. Is it weird that I don't remember ever believing? I remember being maybe 4 or 5 years old and getting scolded by my mom not to spoil Santa for my little brother. Story 14. When I asked my parents to set up cameras to catch Santa and the elf moving at night, they told me he was not real. I cried for 30 minutes. Then I was fine and went to buy a tree. Story 15. It was a smooth transition for me. I went from believing to a common-sense perspective. I see life differently now. Santa is still real in my heart. It is a mindset. Story 16. I committed 12 war crimes and violated the Geneva Conventions 6 times, and still received Christmas presents. Story 17. I was raised as a Jehovah's Witness. From birth, we were told that Santa was demonic, so you could not take me anywhere near him because I would scream in fear. Story 18. Do you want the real sad truth? I'm a foster kid. In my second home, I had been in the first for a couple of months. They wrote from Santa on all the gifts, but I recognized my foster mom's handwriting. I was 8. I was quietly crushed and felt guilty for being upset because they had bought gifts for me, taken me in, and loved me. Reddit has helped me realize why Christmas is such a rough time for me. Laughing my ass off. Story 19. Christmas morning, after opening all the presents, I realized that the gifts from my mom and dad used the same wrapping paper as the ones from Santa. I asked my mom if she thought that was cool or something, and she decided that was the moment to tell me Santa wasn't real, and then had the nerve to tell me not to tell my little cousins on the way to my aunt's house. When we walked in the door, my aunt asked what Santa had brought me. I started to say nothing because I had been told not to tell my cousins, and then I got whacked on the head. Story 20. I don't remember the transition. I remember believing in Santa and later not believing, but I don't recall when it happened, so it wasn't traumatic. Story 21. The first year my dad played the Easter Bunny, he dropped a bag of jelly beans on the glass kitchen table and woke everyone in the house. I had already suspected it did not make sense, and that pretty much sealed the deal for the Easter Bunny, Santa Claus, Tooth Fairy, and others. Story 22. I slowly began to suspect it. At first I thought that the Santas in malls were obviously actors, and then I recognized him as an actor wearing a fake beard on Christmas. In my country, Santa, a hired actor, actually visits on Christmas Eve to give out the presents. All the adults in my family are excited and play along, so it did not feel like my whole family was pranking me but more like being led into a new understanding of the tradition. It is still exciting when Santa comes. Story 23. I do not know. I suddenly became conscious when I was 10 years old. Story 24. My friend was the poor kid in class. He told me on the way home from school in 3rd grade. Worst day ever. Parents confirmed that night. When my children were young, if anyone tried to ruin it for them, we explained it the way the Polar Express did and told them they could keep believing. Story 25. I don't recall ever believing in Santa. Am I alone in this? Story 26. I think I was about 6 years old when I realized that believing in a magical, rotund man who flies around the world once a year with a team of reindeer was absurd. Story 27. I've always been told he's not real and that Christmas is Jesus' birthday. Story 28. When I think back on my childhood, I do not believe I ever thought Santa existed. I remember going to church as a child, but I never believed in God. I do not think I have the capacity to believe. Story 29. At my babysitter's when I was 5, some older children told the younger ones, and I distinctly remember thinking, oh, that makes sense. Unfortunately, I applied the same logic to Jesus, who was described to me as a Santa figure without presents, and I became an atheist. Story 30. In 2nd grade, we were doing something Santa-related, and my best friend leaned over and said, "You don't believe that Santa stuff, do you?" Trying to be cool. I said, "Of course not." He told me how he and his brother had caught their parents the year before placing presents and that their parents had told them the truth. I nodded, held it together, then went home and cried. Story 31. He exists in spirit in each of us who gives a gift to someone at Christmas. Every person who has ever believed becomes a version of the jolly man in red. When I was 13, I heard everyone saying he was made up, so I asked my mother. She gave me a similar answer which I accepted and have shared since. Not dramatic but very memorable. Story 32. As a child, I was excellent at wrapping presents. I wrapped for my elementary school's Christmas store, and other people asked me to wrap gifts for them. I am an autistic woman. I found out Santa did not exist when my friend's mother asked me to wrap the presents for her children and label them from Santa. Story 33. I remember that at a neighborhood Christmas party, the local teenagers told my 6-year-old self that Santa did not exist. I do not know why they said that, but that was when I learned the truth. Story 34. I was 8 and accidentally found a bunch of hidden presents addressed from Santa a few months before December. I put 2 and 2 together and figured it out. Story 35. My parents told me, and I proceeded to tell every kid in the neighborhood because I was outraged that they had lied to us. I was not popular with other parents that year. Story 36. I cannot remember a time when I believed. The whole thing sounded fake from the beginning. Story 37. My nan asked why there was wrapping paper on top of the cupboard. It was the same wrapping paper used on the presents from Santa. Story 38. I figured it out when Santa gave the rich kids expensive gifts and I got a $40 Lego set every year. Don't get me wrong, I was always excited, but I kept wondering why Santa gave the rich kids extravagant presents and not me and my friends, who were less well off. Story 39. I remember when I got a letter from him in the mail. Despite living in a different country with its own frosty fellow, I received no presents from Santa that year, only from my parents. Somewhere out there, a confused version of me is staring at a bunch of Christmas presents that he appreciated but did not ask for. Story 40. My older sister told my two younger brothers and me when I was 6. She was 8 and they were 2 and 4. When my mother found out, she was furious, and for the next 15 years my sister received granny panties for Christmas as punishment for ruining it for the rest of us. If you ask her today at age 40, she will tell you that she does believe in Santa, and if you do not, you get granny panties for 15 years. Story 41. To this day my mother has never admitted that Santa was not real. I am turning 50 next month. Story 42. My mom was high on heroin and nodded off. When I asked, she said no and still has no recollection of that day. I had a terrible childhood. Story 43. Santa left a note after visiting on Christmas morning, thanking us for the treats and other items. I thought the handwriting looked a lot like my mother's. Story 44. I was playing outside and went to open the door to our utility and storage room. It was locked, which was strange, so I tried the other door, which was barricaded with junk and clutter. I squeezed the door open a little and saw a few shiny new toys on the shelves next to the door. A couple of weeks later, the same toys arrived from Santa. Story 45. I was playing hide and seek and hid in Mom's closet. I found gifts for me from Santa. I was 5 and never said anything, but I learned how to tell when Mom was lying to me. Story 46. I was 7 and asked my mom too many questions about Santa. I think she got frustrated and, with a straight face, told me that Santa didn't exist. Story 47. I used to leave letters under my pillow for the tooth fairy. I found them stashed in my mom's drawer. She was sweet and had kept them. She admitted to being the tooth fairy when I asked about the letters. Then I realized what that meant. I learned about the tooth fairy and then all the other stuff at once. Story 48. My father was a pharmacist and owned a drugstore. I realized Santa wrapped our presents with the same paper my father used at the store to wrap jewelry or candy. The paper had no consistent design. Story 49. I don't think I ever believed Santa existed, even when I was little. I always knew my parents bought the presents. No need for Santa. I think I saw Santa as just another mascot like Toucan Sam or Tony the Tiger. Story 50. Dad. You know Santa does not exist, right? Me, yeah, of course. The kids at school have been saying it for a while I slowly died inside. Mom. Did you tell our son that Santa does not exist? I will kill you. Story 51. Our neighbors got a Wii, but they were not better than us. Story 52. We had Father Christmas. Then I saw or read a television show or book I do not remember that mentioned Santa Claus and showed he was the same idea as Father Christmas but not real. The cog's word and I realized none of it was real. That year I saw my mum bring in our Christmas stockings and that confirmed it. Story 53. While playing Aladdin on the Sega Genesis at age 7, I overheard my older sister talking to my mom about her school project. It was about the different mythical holiday creatures around the world, like Krampus. I said, wait, if those aren't real, then neither is Santa, right? My mom said, that's right, you figured it out. Santa isn't real. I shrugged and continued playing my game. I had always hated the idea of being watched by a creepy figure, and I had been anxious when I was told he would not come and give presents if I did not sleep on Christmas Eve. I wondered if he could see me when I used the bathroom or showered. I was relieved he didn't exist. I then applied the same logic to religion and stopped believing in God as well, though I did not admit it until I was about 14. Story 54. My parents always told me it was just a Christmas tradition inspired by a Turkish saint. I was surprised when I went to school and learned that other children were told Santa actually brought the presents, not their parents. Story 55. As far back as I can remember, my parents did not give me presents from Santa, but my cousins did. They were unpleasant, so they must have been on the naughty list. Therefore, logic dictates Santa is a myth. Story 56. No one ever told me that he existed in the first place. Story 57. We never really celebrated Christmas, just the solstice. I remember my dad saying, there is no Santa Claus. Judy Blume's Superfudge proved it. Story 58. There are 3 stages in life. 1. You believe in Santa. 2. You do not believe in Santa. 3. You are Santa. Story 59. I found the list my organized dad wrote of who was getting which present. Of course I was snooping where I should not have been, but I still think it is their fault, certainly not mine. Story 60. When I was younger, I was a terrible snoop and spoiled some surprises for myself. Every year my mom managed to hide enough that I still believed. I remember being at a friend's house. She was a couple of years older than me and the youngest of 5 children, so she probably found out early. I said, I saw these presents under my mom's bed. I can't believe there. Are those in addition to the ones from Santa? She looked me dead in the eye and said, You still believe in Santa? That's your parents doing all that. I was crushed and felt foolish. Of course, the first thing I did was go to my best friend's house to tell her. Her mother was so mad at me and made me promise to keep quiet for the sake of her younger brother and sister. Story 61. One time someone forgot to use the spoiler flare on an AskReddit post. Story 62. I was playing hide and seek with my little brother when I found one of my Christmas presents in my mother's closet. On Christmas morning, it was under the tree with a tag that said from Santa. I kept that secret from everyone for several years until my brother learned that Santa did not exist. Story 63. My older brother, 8 years older, had to babysit me when I was about 4. One December evening, he made me a lookout at the window of my parents' bedroom to make sure they did not come back early. He went through his Christmas presents that my parents had stored in the large walk-in closet. A 4-year-old has a short attention span, so I eventually left my post and followed him into the closet. Inside, I found all my presents too. I was shocked when, on Christmas morning, my parents claimed all of it came from Santa. I figured it out that morning. I remember feeling let down, but I knew not to tell my parents, partly because that would have meant admitting to snooping and partly because I felt that if I did not play along, I might not be able to ask for anything. I even asked to see Santa at the mall every year until about middle school so my parents would think I still believed. By the way, I never purposely snooped again. I still cannot stand knowing what I am going to get. Story 64. I read the book Superfudge in 2nd or 3rd grade. What the heck, Judy Blume? Laughing out loud. Story 65. My mom took me to Walgreens on Christmas Eve and started filling the cart with stocking stuffers. I asked her what she was doing. She asked, What do you mean? I laughed and said I was just joking. I was 13. Story 66. I never did. It was hard to believe when we did not have a fireplace. Story 67. My parents and I went shopping to get presents for my brother. On Christmas morning, the stuffed Tyrannosaurus Rex I had seen them buy was now labeled from Santa, and a gift I had not seen before was labeled from Mom and Dad. Story 68. My mom worked 3 jobs and couldn't afford to buy us anything for Christmas. She told us in the car on the way home from a Christmas Eve party when I was 7 that Santa wasn't real, and she didn't want us to think we were bad kids because we didn't have any presents. My brother was 8. My sister was 3 and asleep. Someone from the church showed up that night with about 10 gifts each, and we woke up with presents under the tree. My mom tried to play it off like a Christmas miracle, saying Santa was real. We had heard them bringing the gifts in, but we went along with it so my mom and sister would be happy. Story 69. When I was quite young, I woke up in the middle of the night, excited to catch Santa, and found my parents wrapping presents on the kitchen table. Story 70. I accidentally discovered an unwrapped present in my parents' room, which I later found under the tree with a From Santa tag. Story 71. I believed for a very long time because my parents did such a good job making him seem real. We would put carrots on the deck for the reindeer, and my parents would snap them in half when I went to bed so they looked eaten. They would label some gifts from Santa, but not all of them, to give a mix of presents from mom and dad and from Santa. They showed me a Santa tracker on the local news. My older sister never ruined it for me. I believed in Santa until about 4th grade. Christmas was always magical for me as a child, and I was extremely lucky. Story 72. Story time. Growing up, my parents never let me believe Santa or any other fairy tale character was real, so I never had an existential crisis about his existence. In 1st grade, my class was talking about Santa Claus and I blurted out, "Santa isn't real." Because to me he wasn't, and I thought it was common knowledge. I didn't understand why other kids believe, so I tried to correct them. Immediately the whole class erupted, everyone defending Santa and arguing with me. My teacher pulled me out of the classroom and she was furious, saying how dare I say that and that I should be ashamed of myself. She warned me not to say anything when we went inside, or she would send me to the principal's office and call my parents. I was confused and upset because I was getting in trouble for telling the truth. Back inside, a kid turned to me and angrily insisted Santa was real and that I was lying. Being the little kid I was, I defended myself and the teacher immediately told me to be quiet. Looking back, saying Santa wasn't real was not the right thing to do, but I was very confused and hurt then. It was a memorable lesson about keeping my mouth shut. Story 73. I asked my mom how much the Atari cost. When she told me, I shot back, "I thought Santa brought it." She didn't even try to backpedal. I think she was relieved that she didn't have to pretend anymore. Story 74. I thought this didn't make any sense, so I guessed it wasn't real. Story 75. I found the Easter Bunny cache in our basement coal room closet. It instantly dawned on me that if one wasn't true, then neither was Santa, and it was doubly awful. Story 76. I was eating dinner one evening in early December when my wife told me she was sick of the pretense and said my family had been lying to me the whole time. Story 77. My mom had cancer, and we couldn't afford much anyway. I remember she pulled my brother and me into the stairwell and told us Santa and the Tooth Fairy weren't real because they couldn't afford anything with all the bills. I don't remember my reaction very well, but I'm sure that was one of the hardest things my mom ever had to do. It was also the greatest Christmas ever in terms of presents, because people from our church and my mom's coworkers got us many gifts, far more than we'd ever received before. It had a big impact on me. Now I work for a company that organizes outreaches like this for struggling families. Happy kids really are the lifeblood of many families. Story 78. When I opened my presents, my parents would say, "Well, what do you say?" I would say, "I don't know, he's not here." They would get mad. Then one Christmas in 2nd grade, I woke up early and saw my mom bringing in presents. Story 79. What do you mean Santa doesn't exist? Is everyone else aware of this but me? Story 80. Around 8 years old, I recognized my uncle's handwriting on most of the From Santa gifts, especially the nicer ones. Meanwhile, I received a shoebox-sized package prominently labeled with the Toronto Star toy drive that contained a used toy also said to be from Santa. Story 81. When my sister bent over to get a gift in 2003 and revealed her tribal butterfly lower back tattoo, the conversation shifted swiftly. Story 82. My mom told me about the first day of kindergarten, along with the Tooth Fairy, the Easter Bunny, and everyone. I acted as if I knew she was not a good mom. Story 83. I do not know exactly, but I upset my mother. I was 5, and my parents were putting on the act for my eldest sister and me. She already knew and never said anything to me. I told them it was okay and that they did not have to pretend anymore. My mother cried because she had hoped the magic would last at least a couple more years. I was a smart kid. I do not know what happened to me. Story 84. My mother forgot to remove the CVS pharmacy sticker from the bottom of my Easter basket when I was 9. Then the rest followed. Story 85. One Christmas Eve, when I was about 10 or 11, my step-siblings were asleep after watching the Polar Express. My father came out, saw that I was still awake, and asked me to help him with something. He started bringing out gifts and had me help him put them under the tree. When he handed me the first gift, I realized Santa did not exist. Story 86. I did not find two presents waiting for me at home. I had been visiting family in the South and received gifts to open, but when I returned home there were none. Story 87. When I was in second grade, I found the box my scooter came in under the back steps. I sat back on my heels and imagined my parents putting it there, which meant they had put the scooter under the tree too. Story 88. My parents said we are Muslim and do not believe in Santa. Story 89. Wait, Santa doesn't exist? Then who's been leaving these gifts? Story 90. My dad always said that if I did not believe in him, he would not come, so I never stopped believing. Story 91. I gradually figured it out on my own and noticed that Santa and my mother had the same handwriting. Story 92. When I was 5, my mom said, "I'm taking that fucking thing back." Story 93. I found my dad eating the cookies and milk we left for Santa. Story 94. I don't remember. I might have asked my parents or figured it out myself on the internet. Story 95. My parents left the tags on. I soon found out that Santa would not shop at Amazon. Then I put 2 and 2 together. I was 7. Story 96. My parents and I have completely different versions of what happened. So at this point I do not know which is true. I remember, as clear as day, my father telling me outright and unprompted that Santa was not real when I was in second grade on a walk to the park. I was very upset that they had lied to me. My father insists I figured it out on my own and told him I knew Santa was not real. Story 97. I caught my father setting up gifts. I had already been suspicious. My youngest son's experience was more heartbreaking. Being the younger brother, he was bound to learn sooner. His brother was 10 when he was 7. My youngest son was smart and suspicious. He kept asking his brother's friends whether Santa was real. To their credit, they dodged the question. But when asked directly, one said no. He was fine at first, but then I found him in his room surrounded by all his Christmas books, gently sobbing. I am crying just typing this. He is 16 now and still loves Christmas. He just chopped down a tree for his bedroom. Story 98. I was in first grade and 7 billion people in one night seemed like too much for a fat white guy and some deer. Story 99. I was in first grade at school when another child was telling everyone. Story 100. I figured it out. His letters were in the same handwriting as my mum's. It also didn't make sense that the presents were already in the house, so why would some guy be coming? Story 101. My grandfather handed my sister a newspaper with an article about our school. Right next to it was an article titled "How to Tell Your Kids He Is Not Real." She read it and, in turn, spoiled it for her little sister. Story 102. Mary Lorraine and I were in the second grade together. One day she ran around the school playground and told everyone that your parents were Santa Claus. Story 103. I had a lovely classmate in second grade, Jamie, who told me that Santa was dead and that other people did the work. Story 104. Between 6 and 7 I became skeptical of the idea. When I was 6 I believed but had questions. We did not have a fireplace, so I did not understand how he would get in. The year before my grandmother had been visiting and sleeping on the couch, and my parents said she had gotten up and let Santa in. That did not happen the following year, and they had no clear answers. By 7 I was very skeptical but hesitant to say so in case I was wrong. I was at my aunt's house that year and noticed my presents, supposedly from Santa, used the same wrapping paper as the adults' gifts. Most of my presents were actually at my house and wrapped in paper that seemed chosen to suit my mother's tastes. My cousins let me stay up late in the backyard on Christmas Eve and I did not see a single flying reindeer. So the evidence mounted. At 8 I received absolute confirmation because my parents were very loud while arranging the presents. And I told them. Story 105. I do not remember exactly, but the tags on the presents that said, "From Santa," were written in the same handwriting as those that said, "From Dad." Story 106. It was very traumatic. I was 4 years old, almost 5, when my older sister discovered that Santa did not exist. My parents thought she could not keep it to herself, so they told me the truth, believing it would be better coming from them. It happened right before Christmas. I remember crying and screaming, "Why did you tell me?" I felt so betrayed. I had been sworn to secrecy and promised not to tell my friends, but after Christmas I told one, and her mother told me I should not tell lies. That felt like a second betrayal. I could not believe an adult would punish me when she knew I was telling the truth. Maybe that is why I do not like Christmas very much. It was too traumatic at a young age. Story 107. What the fuck do you mean Santa doesn't exist? Who the fuck are you? 45 years have been a lie. Story 108. We did not have a fireplace growing up, and our parents were very religious. Story 109. If Santa is not real, whose lap am I sitting on at the mall every year? Story 110. It was always my grandfather dressed as Santa. When I figured it out, my parents began labeling all the gifts as from the Christmas angel. They kept that up for my siblings and never used the Santa story with them. Story 111. My parents broke the news to me, and I bawled my eyes out. Story 112. My parents told me matter-of-factly that we were Jewish when I asked if I could see Santa. Story 113. My parents told me while I was sorting Pokemon cards, but I had suspected it 2 years earlier. Story 114. One early December. When I was a child, I was snooping in my parents' closet with my little brother to figure out what presents they had hidden on the top shelf. We moved a bag aside and, to our great delight, discovered a Sky Climbers Cliffhangers electric race car set. We could hardly wait until Christmas morning to play with it. Imagine my surprise on Christmas morning when the car track was already set up under the Christmas tree with a note from Santa Claus. Story 115. I always thought the idea was absurd. When I was about 4, I noticed that the labels on my presents from Santa were written in my mother's handwriting. The following year, when she started talking about Santa in the build-up to Christmas, I said, "Mom, why are you lying?" This took her completely by surprise. My sister, on the other hand, found out much later and was devastated. Story 116. Once I was old enough to consider the question, it became clear that it was just a story. I don't think my parents wanted to give Santa much credit for it. Story 117. My cousins tried to ruin my holiday. Unfortunately, I had already been doubtful, so I took the news in stride. I tripled down on lying for my baby brother, though. Each year they tried to ruin it for him as well, and I became increasingly elaborate with my lies until his peers began to doubt him. Story 118. My parents bought my brother and me toys from the dollar store every year. He got cheap G.I. Joe action figures, and I got those fake Barbies that were hollow along with cheap chocolate and coloring books, things you could buy for less than $5. We both appreciated it. The stockings were our favorites. We would get name-brand candy and maybe a Hot Wheels car. One year, when I was about 6 or 7, my brother and I walked into the living room and found piles of presents. We both had new bikes. I got a Barbie car, some really cool Bratz dolls, and Polly Pocket toys. My brother got remote control cars and wrestling figures. It was absolutely insane. Watching how relaxed my dad seemed that morning is something I will never forget. But it also told me that Santa was not real, because if he were, why was every year not like this? Why did we get all these awesome toys but have gravy on white bread for breakfast? I still eat that. It is the best, by the way. We were the family sponsored by the school that year. Being poor was hard, but now I always buy a toy for a child from the Giving Trees every year. Story 119. When I was 7, I confronted my mother and told her I was pretty sure Santa was not real. She told me not to tell my little sister. Story 120. We ran a grocery store. Most of my presents came from there. When I was 5 to 7 years old, I helped my mom make Christmas gift bags that included a toy and some sweets and snacks. It was obvious Santa was not bringing the presents. We sold them to parents. Story 121. I learned it from the movies I watched during the winter holidays as a child. Story 122. I saw charity bins, and it did not make sense to me that Santa would visit the houses of every child, have a full-scale workshop, and still need ordinary people to donate toys. Story 123. The cats got their own stocking from Santa with cat treats and toys and a card wishing them a Merry Christmas. I knew they couldn't read. It was in my mother's handwriting. Story 124. I was about 7 when I realized Santa's handwriting looked a lot like my mom's. When I was 8, Hurricane Hugo hit. The eye of the storm passed over us and we lost power, so the family could only talk. We were scared and discussed anything to keep our minds off the fact that the front door kept trying to blow open. I asked why her handwriting looked like Santa's. That night the truth came out about Santa, the Easter Bunny, and the Tooth Fairy. Shortly afterward, Dad wanted me to sleep, so he told me to chug one of his sodas. It was a Busch Light. Story 125. I saw a postal truck stop at my house while I was at a friend's. I saw a long box. When I got home, I asked and was told to go back outside. At bedtime, I spotted it behind my parents' bedroom door. It was not there the next day, but it had moved under their bed. 2 days later, it was wrapped in paper. Then it joined the pile by the fireplace. Story 126. Phoebe Cates told me about gremlins, kind of the perfect person to hear it from, though. Story 127. My dad never let that happen. That is very strange, because he dressed up as the fat bastard for my older sister. Story 128. I was a naturally curious child. One year around Christmas, I saw that Santa had brought some presents to my grandma's house early. My grandma has some of the most immaculate penmanship I have ever seen. Whenever she wrote us a card or something for work, it amazed me. Needless to say, Santa and my grandma had the same handwriting, and the jig was up. Story 129. He exists in other dimensions, realities, and timelines. Bringing him here has been a challenge, and scientists are still working on it. Don't give up hope yet. Story 130. My brother, my cousin, and I were in front of our fireplace. I mentioned Santa coming down the chimney, and they could not contain their laughter. Story 131. I was about 7 or 8 when a box arrived in the mail full of toys from Santa, but it was labeled Salvation Army. Story 132. Are you stupid? How do the presents come when you are asleep? I am 8 and I know more than you. Idiots. Gosh. Story 133. No adult ever made that much effort for me, so I did not know I was supposed to believe Santa was a real person. Adults around me referred to Santa with a wink and an acting voice, so I assumed it was something we all pretended as part of the holiday. Story 134. I was one of the younger kids on my block and cannot remember ever believing in Santa. I do not recall being told he was not real. I just always knew. Story 135. I realized Santa's handwriting looked very familiar to my mother's. Story 136. Well, I was 24 years old and spent my first Christmas in jail. I didn't get a single thing. I was in jail because I had my mom murdered by a low-IQ boyfriend whom I used to do my dirty work for. Anyhow, I thought, come on, Santa. I never did the actual killing, so I should have gotten something. I planned to have the public make up for it by telling my sad woe-is-me story so people would scam me and send money. I would set up a GoFundMe called My Next Victim. Then I woke the hell up. Story 137. As the 7th of 8 children, I am pretty sure they told me when I was very young. I do not remember ever believing in Santa. Story 138. I worked it out logically. We did not have a chimney. Our door was too thick. And we lived on the 3rd floor of an apartment building. I figured it out before most kids did. But I could not grasp that World Wrestling Entertainment was not real. Go figure. Story 139. When I was 6, my brother, 2 years older than me, repeatedly asked my mum if he could tell her. She eventually agreed to stop him. He was an annoying little git. When he told me, I remember turning to my mum, feeling incredibly cross with her and telling her that she had lied to me. I did not care about Santa. I had always considered him dodgy after sitting on his knee one year at a department store. Poor mum. Story 140. We grew up not believing. We were raised as generic Catholics, but Mom wanted us to remember Jesus' birthday as the reason for the season, not Santa. We always knew presents were from our parents and family, and that we should be grateful because they did not have to get us anything. Story 141. My room was switched with the guest room at some point when I was younger. A little before Christmas, I was playing with some toys in my new room and remembered I had another toy that I wanted to play with but could not find. I decided to check my old room, which was now the guest room, to see if it had been left there. I opened the closet in the guest room and saw a few brand new toys that I knew were for me. I assumed my parents must have bought them as birthday presents since my birthday was coming up in February. I decided it was best to leave them there and pretend to be surprised on my birthday. On Christmas morning, I opened all the presents I had found in the closet a few weeks earlier. Reality came crashing down. I did not say anything, but from that moment on I knew the truth. Story 142. I was having really bad anxiety and growing pains when I was 9 years old. The Santa story had always been a rumor, but it really hit hard that year. I finally broke down in front of my parents, and they told me the truth. It was hard to take for the first 30 minutes, but then I got over it. Story 143. Shut your damn mouth before Santa hears you. I have only had a couple of Christmases, and even I know he is real. Story 144. I saw my presents hidden in my mom's store. It was exactly what I asked for, and then I knew. Story 145. I don't remember ever thinking Santa was real. My dad explained what he represents, and it was also taught in school. Story 146. I wrote my usual letter to Santa, but this time I filled it with every curse word I had learned by the age of 7. The next morning I got my ass royally hooped. I did not regret it, though. Story 147. I'm Muslim. I have never celebrated or believed in holiday mascots. Story 148. Many years ago, when I was in 2nd grade, I brought a toy that I had received for Christmas to show and tell. I am 66 now. I remember getting up in front of the class and saying that the toy came from Santa. Most of the boys started giggling and rolling their eyes. I did not know what was going on. When I got home, I told my mother about it and she explained the truth. I told her that I supposed it was the same thing with the Easter Bunny and the Tooth Fairy. Story 149. There is no point in my life at which I can honestly say that I remember believing in Santa. The whole thing never made sense. Story 150. I just watched Miracle on 34th Street, and I heard Judge Henry X. Harper say, since the United States government declares this man to be Santa Claus, this court will not dispute it. Case dismissed. Story 151. The S in his signature matched the S in my mother's signature. Story 152. Our daughter-in-law has a newborn and does not know whether she is going to tell the child about Santa. She does not want to lie. I thought this was really strange. Everyone believes in Santa, at least when they are raised Christian. Story 153. Wait, he actually existed? I grew up in a house where Christmas wasn't celebrated, so he was always considered not real. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.